Today I'm going to be doing a video on some basic Holley carburetor identification. Here we have an 850 Holley double pumper, model 4150. Here we have a 750 CFM Holley vacuum secondary. And here we have a 800 model 4165 double pumper. What do these numbers mean? Well, I'm going to start with CFM. That's basically what the carb can flow. That's dictated by venturi size and size of the base plate bores. So the more powerful and demanding the engine, the bigger carb you need. Really, this is probably what all you're going to need for any street vehicle unless you got something really radical. Now, talking about model numbers, this is a model 4150. Basically means it has two metering blocks. The only difference in this style of carb between a 4150 and a 4160 is a 4160 would have a metering plate. This replaces the jets. Here's a metering block. You would just screw the jets in right here. This carb here actually was a 4160 that I converted to a 4150 just for the convenience of tuning. This funny looking thing here is a model 4165. You know it's going to be 4165 or 4175 because of the small primary and large secondary throttle bores. You can see it's a double pumper. This is a little bit different than the first two. 4165 is going to be a double pumper. It's going to have a mechanical secondary activation. And it's going to have a secondary metering block. If it were a 4175, it would have a vacuum secondary and a secondary metering plate. These carbs are basically designed as emissions replacements. It's a direct bolt-on replacement for the Rochester Quadrajet. If you take a close look at this carb, see it's actually a two-corner idle setup. Here's an idle screw. There isn't one in the secondary block. And there's an idle screw. It's not one in the secondary. Actually, all three of these carbs are two-corner idle. A four-corner idle would have four idle screws. That carb there actually came in two types, a 800 CFM and a 650 CFM. And believe it or not, the throttle bores are actually all the same size. It's dictated by the venturi size. With that being said, another good way to identify this carb is by the list number. This is basically the carburetor part number. And as you see there, it's found on the air horn or choke tower of the carb. If you notice, these two carbs have different float poles. That one there is what you call a side hung float, and this one's a center hung float. So basically inside here, you have a float like this. Let's do one of these numbers, operating the needle and seat. The center hung float pole has a float that looks like that. Another difference in the float poles of these two carbs is this 850 double pumper is a dual inlet. You have a line that attaches there and there, basically separately feeding each float pole. This 800 has what's called a fuel transfer tube, which is right here. The fuel is only fed to this bowl, and then it goes through this tube and then feeds the second bowl. Those can be converted to the dual inlet type. Taking a look at these two carbs, this one here is a vacuum secondary. It's real obvious because it has this big diaphragm on the side. You can see that the mechanical linkage does not activate those secondaries. Basically, the suction from the intake manifold when you're on it pulls those secondaries down according to the spring that's fighting that diaphragm. Inside here, here's the double pumper. All these double pumpers have mechanical secondaries. And since we're taking a look at this is what's called a progressive linkage. The primary throttle shafts turn 40 degrees before the secondary starts to actuate, and then they hit wide open throttle at the same time. Some carbs will have a 1-to-1 ratio with these two, and that's called a direct linkage. So here's the 850 double pumper. You can see an arm for the primary accelerator pump, and an arm for the secondary accelerator pump. Here's the 750 vacuum secondary, arm for the primary pump, no arm for the secondary. Here's the 800 CFM model 4165.